Okay, Chris Speaks here today with Brandon Mosley for our BCS State of Alabama podcast, and we have Democratic U.S. Senate hopeful here with us, Dakarai Larriet. Dakarai, how are you, man?
Good, good. Just keeping busy, so much travel and meeting people up and down the state. So it's been a really great summer. And I guess now we're in fall. So we're a year
Yeah.
out now.
So tell me, why do you want to be a senator? Why do you want to go to Washington?
It all started for me from a false arrest last year in the state of Michigan. And when I realized that the criminal justice system was not working for most people, I knew that we had to change the laws. We had to do something to create a system that truly does provide equal justice under law, which is emblazoned upon our Supreme Court. And as I started to speak to Alabamians up and down the state, I realized everything's broken. So, education, healthcare, the economy, everyone feels like they're being left behind. So, we've got to start to correct these issues with policy.
Dakarai, one Democrat has won a Senate race in Alabama. That was Doug Jones in a special election in 2017. I think the last time was Richard Shelby actually running for re-election as a Democrat. Of course, he later switched parties in
Yes.
1992. What makes you think that a state that just went 64% for Donald J. Trump
Hmm.
is going to seriously consider a Democrat next year?
Well, for starters, we have to contest every single seat and give the voters a Democratic option. That's the baseline. Now, the path to victory is building upon what Senator Jones was able to do barely 10 years ago. But I'm a different kind of candidate. I'm younger. I'm going to go after demographics that Jones wouldn't even know to speak to. I've already reached out to folks. When I say young, I mean first time voting. And we are going to make that a very big part of the campaign. Urban folks, I live in downtown Birmingham. Queer folks. So I'm an openly gay man. We are building that out as a constituent group, and we've received national um, recognition of this campaign. And we are going to get those people mobilized and excited about the election. And sadly, in the state of Alabama, our participation rate is so low. There's a lot of opportunity, a lot of votes that are just never making it out the door. So we've got to get those people excited. We got to get them registered and then get them out the door on November, I believe, 3rd of 2026.
Dakarai, you mentioned urban voters and gay voters. Doesn't the Democratic Party already get those constituents?
Well, I would say that those largely are considered Democratic voters, but our participation rate is so low. I'm sure
Oh,
you
okay.
followed the August municipal elections throughout the
Yes, sir.
state. Most cities were 20%. I saw some 15. It was astounding. And then, of course, we had the runoffs that came after those general elections. So there's a lot of opportunity, a lot of juice to squeeze. And that's what we're looking to do to get people who just don't see themselves as a part of the process super engaged and excited. And it starts from little things. It's by being present, it's by talking to those people. I filmed the video with a Montgomery rapper who's now based out of Birmingham. He was stunned that my campaign even reached out to him. So imagine that. That's how you start to get people to show up in a way that they never have before.
Dakari, I'm here in Montgomery. I'm, at the intersection of Court Street and Jefferson. And about 2 weeks ago, there was a massive gun battle 2 blocks from our headquarters, between, I guess we will say, rival gangs. coming back from a fair festival deal. Um, you're worried about, people being unjust, about unjustly imprisoned. And some folks actually think we need more prisons and more aggressive policing. Where are we on that? Do we need just find as many, put 60, 70, 80,000 Alabamians in prison, or is there something else we could do here?
Well, that's clearly not working. And this regime, Steve Marshall, clearly has not been effective for the last 8+ years. So we are not going to imprison our way out of this situation. And these are death camps. They're not corrections facilities. They are basically creating more hardened criminals when folks actually get out the door, if they do, um, thanks to the horrible conditions in these prisons. But I think that we really have, as a test case, all these other states that do it well. And I always go back to Massachusetts. I'm a data guy. They have some very simple things that they do that we could replicate in state. And I just don't know what it's going to take for the state legislators to realize we've got to do background checks, red flag laws. These things work, training programs, um, relook at our conceal laws within the state. That's how we can make things safer, but still protect our rights. As Americans to the Second Amendment. I'm a gun owner. My family is from Prattville, Alabama. 2, 3 generations ago, we hunted to feed ourselves. That's cultural. It's not going anywhere, but we can all hold hands and agree to do it in a safer way because what we have is an epidemic of gun violence. But just to be clear, the prison system throwing more people into these crowded prisons, that's not keeping us safer.
Corey, I got kind of a tough question here for you. I think it's conversations we need to have, um, to get an understanding. Are you concerned that being a gay man is going to hurt you with black voters?
No, um, I think it's a new day, and I believe in Alabama. And I think that we should not write off our state. We are so much more sophisticated than that. It is 2025. And as I always say to folks outside the state, and I'll say it to folks in the state, we have gay people at every single level of government. And I'm not here to out people, but I think you know quite well that is true. And Alabamians are very comfortable looking the other way if the individual puts their head down and does the work. And that's not the focus of this campaign. It is one of 1,000 interesting things about me. And the struggles that I've experienced as a result of my sexuality have allowed me to become a more empathetic leader. Um, and creative leader. But that is not the focus of this campaign. The focus is my 20 years in public service. So serving in harm reduction, serving communities impacted by drug use, um, individuals impacted by homelessness and food insecurity, education, serving on the board of University of Alabama Alumni Association. That's the focus of this campaign.
Dakarai, for viewers that don't know, HBO has recently come out with a documentary which does not portray the Alabama Department of Corrections in the greatest of lights. We're currently under a federal lawsuit. I mean, not brought by Joe Biden, but actually originally brought by the first Trump administration based on an investigation ordered by Senator Jeff Sessions, of all people. should the federal government just step in and take over the prisons?
Well, it's just so disappointing. And I don't think that the leaders that are in place, Steve Marshall and Kay Ivey, have any desire to fix the problems. Creating 3 mega prisons that are probably going to be even more violent is all we could come up with after being sued again and again and again and facing human rights violations and civil rights violations. So we have a lot of work to do here. I don't know if there needs to be a federal takeover. I have actually created a 6 point legislative plan. It's on my website, DakariLarriet.com. And there's some very simple things that we can do. And part of it is addressing the issues with drug addiction within the facilities, making them places of treatment, thinking about job training programs so that folks come out with skills and they can actually help the community, ensuring that we don't let drugs into the facility. And as I learned when I participated in the Joint Legislative Prison Oversight meeting, a lot of the drug dealing is coming from the corrections officers. So we have some very basic low hanging fruit that we need to address. And if we do that, I don't think we need a federal takeover.
Dakari, let me ask you this. We had a guy on a few days ago from Montgomery was talking about the crime problems. And was talking about, murders in this community. I think it's what 13% of the population is black, and the murders like 50%. Why is it that we see that crime rate? Because I know people are not inherently born to commit crimes. Is it because they're not getting education to get them out of poverty? Or those things going hand in hand? What is the root cause of it?
I would sort of like to see those statistics. Before I answer that piece, Chris, I want to say what we can see within our state, starting with education and then obviously going into prison, is that Black folks are over policed, right? So that's just a fact. We know that. We know more than 50% of the population within our prisons are represented as Black people when state population is about 26%. Now, going back to the initial question, you're correct. When you are not gainfully employed, when you have no hope in life, when you are perhaps food insecure, homeless, suffering from addiction, you are going to be much more likely to commit crimes. That's pretty obvious. So I think it really all starts with education, and that's something that we've not done as a state for a while. We've not invested in education, and that's the core principle and pillar of this campaign, is investing in education and giving everyone a fair shot to excel. And that's where it all starts. And then healthcare. Healthcare is the second pillar in this campaign. So mental health is a big, big opportunity where a lot of people are not getting access to that.
Dukari, whatever your religious beliefs, the the wildness and the level of violence appears to have increased tremendously after we took Bible study and religion instruction and daily prayer out of the schools. Whether you believe in Jesus Christ or that there is a supreme being, is it a possibility that a percentage of the population needs that idea that if you act bad in this life, you're going to hell, or at least a lot worse place in the next life? So maybe you'll behave while you're here.
Well, I think our right to practice our religion is a First Amendment right. And I encourage everyone to exercise that right. And we also are a nation that believes in separating church and state. Um, and
But
we've,
was that a mistake?
well,
Because for most of our history, we didn't operate that way.
well, I think that it's important to respect all religions. And while 75% of us here in Alabama profess to be Christian, that's not everybody. And we want to create inclusive environments. Um, I think that prayer in school it's a challenging thing when you think about being fully inclusive. Now, I was baptized as a Catholic, raised as a Jehovah's Witness. I'm a very religious person. That's my experience. I don't know if that's right for everyone, but again, I want to go back to the policy. When I think about certain states, again, like Massachusetts, they've been able to address their crime issues, particularly gun violence, with policies that work. I don't think that they're instituting in school prayer to do that. So I think there are other ways to get to our root issue that we're facing here in Alabama. And I think they are largely economic, driven by our lack of investment in education.
A couple of years ago, well, it was actually it's 4 years ago, I interviewed Chris Woods when he was running for mayor of Birmingham, and he was wanting to introduce trade schools again in high school, where students were coming out learning, two different trades. Do you think that's something we should look at?
Mm.
Because not everybody's meant to go to college.
Oh, for sure. So that's definitely one of the key areas that we are building out as far as our economic policy. So ensuring that everyone has a pipeline to success. And that can be a trade, it can be bringing the right kinds of jobs to marry to our white collar talent. So in my case, I had to leave the state to find work when I graduated from University of Alabama because there were just not careers for me in state. I would have been underemployed. So I absolutely support that. And I think we have some really good opportunities to attract businesses to the talent that we actually have in state.
Um, President Donald J. Trump recently went to Israel where he negotiated a peace agreement with the state of Israel and whoever is left alive running Hamas. Seems like your Hamas leaders got killed pretty regularly. Um, is that a lasting agreement or is this doomed to fail?
Sadly, it doesn't seem like those entities want peace. It just doesn't. And even in my relatively short years as an adult, I've seen all of the skirmishes there. And I was actually privileged to travel to Israel in one brief period when it was peaceful. And when I was there, I could still feel the tension. So sadly, I am only cautiously optimistic that this will allow peace for a while.
Corey, I got another type of question for you. Have you ever experienced discrimination because of your sexuality, or have you experienced more discrimination with that over race?
Well, I experienced both last year when I was falsely arrested in Michigan, and that propelled my run. Um, Really, it was realizing how broken the criminal justice system was, but the entire experience and not being able to get justice from that moment with video evidence was so upsetting.
For readers that aren't, viewers that aren't, that don't know the background there, could you explain what exactly happened in Michigan?
Oh, sure, absolutely. So I was driving um, and dropping a friend off, and I was apprehended by the Michigan State Police, subjected to homophobic comments, mocking of my name. I have an African name, and it was pronounced in a very embarrassing and humiliating way. And I was accused of driving under the influence of alcohol falsely. And after testing negative for alcohol in handcuffs at the local hospital, I was still jailed and told that I needed to stay in the jailhouse to sober up for marijuana. So it was kind of a moving target. And finally, I was released. Charges were dropped within a matter of days because they were baseless. And after getting the body and dash cam from that night, we realized that the troopers were attempting to plant drugs in my vehicle. And we sued the police force after going through the internal review process for months and months and months.
Oh yeah.
And we are now sitting in the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals waiting for our day of justice.
Wow. And even though the charges were dropped, isn't it true that you'll still have an arrest record show up for that?
No, everything was supposedly expunged, but
Okay.
I was not even arraigned. Um, and this is why I'm so concerned about bills like HB 202 here in our state, which is the Back the Blue, expanding qualified immunity. So we're going to get to the point where no one gets any type of justice because we know that these internal reviews within the Department of Corrections or police forces don't go anywhere. The last recourse for the public when they are wronged is a civil suit. And we have basically eliminated that for all intents and purposes. And there's no accountability
Yeah, I have a big problem with
left.
that bill too.
Yes. And I think most people don't realize it does extend to corrections officers. So since 2020, the state has spent $57 million defending corrections officers for torturing prisoners. So rather
Wow.
than fixing the problem, just prevent their ability to sue now. That seems to be the intent of the bill.
Hikari, for about the last 10 years or so, there's been a massive buildup of the Chinese military forces and more threats against Taiwan. As U.S. Senator, would you support us going to war if China attempts to invade Taiwan, which they consider to be a breakaway province?
This campaign is really focused on Alabama right now, and I do not personally have um, staff advising me on international affairs. So at this point, I'm not comfortable answering that question, but thank you so much for asking.
But the U.S. Senate, it does have oversight over international affairs and military affairs and the global U.S. Presence. So there is enormous, global military and that sort of stuff that like the governor, lieutenant governor really has no concerned with, but it's a U.S. Senate Congress thing.
I absolutely commit to developing our foreign policy. Right now, though, it is focused on those kitchen table issues that Alabamians have told me that they care about, which is education, healthcare, and the economy. And I will be happy to come back to you with some thoughts on that once I've been advised appropriately.
Corey, if you get to the Senate, what kind of legislation would you want to introduce?
Well, I believe this is a role of service, and I've got to advocate for the people in my district and obviously the state, which is Alabama. My personal experience has already led me to draft what I call the Motorist Bill of Rights, and that protects all of us when we're on the roads because we spend so much of our lives in our cars. And what happened to me in Michigan can happen to anyone. So the Motorist Bill of Rights, it's also available on my website, and it basically outlines how these interactions with law enforcement should work. What's a real reason, a probable cause to stop someone? What test uh, can scientifically prove sobriety? And then finally, guarantees the release of information to the primary, the principal, or the family. So, kind of like we saw in Homewood with Jabari Peoples, the family still has not received the full video from that homicide by the police. So, a total miscarriage of justice. So, that is the Motors Bill of Rights as an outline, and we'll be building out more detail over the coming months. That's one of the first bills that I want to champion. But when I think about what really matters to Alabamians, we've got to shore up our education system. And I certainly want to ensure that we protect our Department of Education and ensure that it can do everything it needs to do for the people of Alabama, those with disabilities, minorities, etc. So it really starts with the funding.
On the issue of, how motorists react with law enforcement, have you seen the Otis French Jr. Shooting video?
I have not, and I will take a look at that.
Yeah, me and Christopher, that was leaked, unfortunately. And me and Christopher had previously done a podcast on that. Otis Jr. or OJ, um, if we believe what we're told, he had a malfunctioning indicator light, and so was stopped for that. And in the stop for the warning ticket for that, there was an altercation, and in the altercation, eventually ended up with poor Otis getting 5 rounds to the chest.
Well, he asked him to
And
step out
killed.
of the car to show him the light and then wants to pat him down for weapons.
Mm,
Even though we are an open carry state, so it's perfectly legal for you to have a weapon in your pocket. There's usually a gun in my pocket, but
Well, one on me right now. I mean, if he would have just handed him the ticket, his warning ticket, to me, his death was all because of that police officer.
well, if OJ had consented to the pat down, he'd probably be alive today. It was
mm,
OJ, the officer probably was rousting OJ, and OJ overreacted. And next thing you know, they're fighting. Next thing you know, OJ's getting shot.
But wasn't he a
mhm.
You
schizophrenic?
probably need to look at that because,
Yeah.
especially down in
I will
South
take a look at
Alabama,
that.
that's a very
Wasn't
big
it?
topic.
Um, yeah. Hey, so let me ask you this about the motors in bill, and I don't know this because I'm curious. Is with that being a federal legislation you're passing, isn't there going to be a contradiction with state laws on that?
So federal would supersede. So one of the other things I want to do is explicitly deny qualified immunity. So it's a big bill. It would change our daily lives throughout the country.
Dakarai, you mentioned education as one of your priorities. Um, isn't the Trump administration trying to do away with the Department of Education and the federal government's role in education? Well, it was never primary. It seems to be reducing from what it used to be under Joe Biden and Barack Obama and, George W. Bush and his, what was it, No Child Left Behind stuff.
Right.
Is that an area where really you probably can't do anything for Alabama's education if we go the route we seem to be going?
Well, this is where we've got to assert congressional authority and the power of the purse. And I'm sure, and I've read that a number of these lawsuits are working their way through the legal system, but a number of these changes and eliminations of departments, I don't believe are lawful. So I think we're going to see a reversal in a lot of these actions over the next couple of years. It's going to be very painful. My mom is a teacher 35 plus years in. So this is really, really hurtful, especially with her work in special education.
Dakota, what do you think about the president sending National Guard into cities?
Well, the norms, which we've kind of gotten away from, are that the governor requests assistance and there's a collaborative effort when things like that are done. So it's disappointing that it seems that it's almost like being used in a way to intimidate and create a scene. It's like theater. And I contrast that with the lack of action on January 6th when 500 plus legislative leaders were left to fend for themselves in the Capitol.
Dakarai, we're $35 trillion in debt, which is like an insane amount of money. And I think we're burning through, I mean, under both Republican and Democrat presidents, 1 to 2 trillion a year in deficit spending. How would you
Mhm.
balance the budget? What do we
Well,
need to
that's
cut?
so that really speaks to my 20 years in corporate America and creating budgets and being responsible for that. It's codifying what we value. And when I kind of look at a budget, what I need to trim, I generally look at the biggest piece. And what we see as the biggest is debt service and defense. And defense is a non negotiable, but we've got to do it smarter. And debt service, once we get some of this defense spending down, we've got to aggressively start paying down debts in the good years. Because in the bad years, like pandemics, we're going to see that escalation again. So it creates the need for a real financial plan, which we don't talk about very much, and then a much more rigorous budget process instead of these continuing resolutions again and again and again that don't get to the guts of the problem.
Actually, if you go to usdebtclock.org, the two largest drivers of federal spending are Social Security and then Medicare and Medicaid. Debt service is third, and defense, which is, about 930 or 40 billion, is in fourth place.
And so I see that a little bit differently in that Social Security is funded by specific earmarked taxes. So when I think about that, I I
It
think there's
may be
self-funding.
difficult to cut under the current, way it's set up, but
Yeah.
there were cuts made to Medicaid. You could go in and say, Medicaid person, if you're going to see a doctor, you're going to pay a $10 copay. Medicaid person, if you're illegally in the country or you're not a U.S. citizen, you don't get Medicaid, or make the thresholds to be on Medicaid, a little bit lower. Or make them, make it more difficult for people to get on there. You could get big savings. And then there's what you do with prescription drugs and Medicare. Because it was a Republican, George W. Bush, who added the prescription drug benefit to Medicare. Then all of a sudden we started picking up the cost of, these seniors' drugs, and the cost, it just, it was a Republican plan that had bipartisan support, but there was no way to pay for it. It's sort of like Obamacare. There's some good components. It helps a bunch of people. It was passed without a plan to pay for it. And it's driving up the debt.
You know, I think we have a real spend problem. We spend a lot of time talking about the revenue and who's getting a tax cut, who's getting an increase, but I really want us to spend the time looking at each of the line items and rationalizing them and making sure that they reflect our values. And I'm going to again go back to defense. Can we do it smarter and more effectively? I think that's a huge opportunity. I see health as an investment in our people. And if we do it in the right way, it ultimately pays off. So that's not going to be the first area that I look to trim.
Hey, Dakarai, let me ask you a follow-up question here. Talking about shouldn't a president have the ability to enforce the laws because and not rely on the governor? Because if we did that, then Little Rock would have never been integrated, or the University of Alabama, because we know Orville Faubulous and Governor Wallace was not asking for federal support.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch your question,
Yeah, I
Chris.
think he's
Should,
referring to
shouldn't
the
the
civil rights movement. When the Little Rock schools were enforced, that was by President Eisenhower, who ordered federal troops to step in. Now, in the Alabama desegregation, that was, federal law enforcement, U.S. Marshals, but President Kennedy and then Johnson, they put the Alabama National Guard and the Southern National Guards on alert, so they were under federal
Mhm,
control. So the governors could not order the National Guard to go in to block like voting rights protesters or school
mhm.
integration protesters, which sadly at the time, some of our governors, probably including Wallace, probably would have done had he been allowed to have that tool.
Mm, mm. Well, yeah, I think the question was, should the president be allowed to enforce the law? That is the nature of the executive branch. So that is the oath that that person takes, and they should be enforcing the law. Absolutely.
Sorry, I probably didn't answer that or ask that the way I should have. Thanks, Brandon, for helping me.
Yeah, we're going back before we were born, historical days. I mean, we're reaching here, Christopher.
No, what I was trying to, correlate it to is, if the President Trump feels like that there's lawless in the streets and he needs to enforce that law or enforce law and order, should the president not have that ability, just like
Mm.
they federalized to enforce, the federal rulings?
Sure, sure, absolutely. So yes, my answer stands. The president is tasked with enforcing the laws, right? But
Mhm.
as we talked about a little bit earlier, does not have authority, the power of the purse. And when the judiciary says, hey, we don't think that there is a mass unrest happening and you don't need to send in these troops, the president then needs to follow that decision, that judicial order. So that's how the system is designed.
But now going back to again, well before we were born, after the Civil War, the federal government sent Union troops and they occupied the former Southern states. And, it's like, okay, we're putting a general in charge of Alabama, and you will be the enforcer of our congressional laws here in Alabama because we don't trust the former Confederates to carry them out. Now, as part of the Hayes Tilden thing, they were pulled the federal troops out in 1876. And then you had Southerners now going to the Senate. And of course, they tended to be former Confederate guys. And one of the things they made a priority and passed was the Posse Comitatus Act, which prevented the federal government from deploying troops to places
Mhm.
like Baltimore, to keep them from seceding in the Civil War, or like Trump is deploying troops to Chicago today. So, the issue is, you know, posse comitatus, even though it was actually pushed by segregationists, actually is the law that President Trump maybe, again, I don't think any of us are lawyers here, and I know
No.
lawyers will argue both ways. that President Trump is actually in violation of when he sends troops to Los Angeles or to Portland or Baltimore or Chicago or Memphis.
Mm,
Although Memphis, the Tennessee governor asked for federal help. So
mhm.
we're going way back in the Wayback Machine here.
Yes, you're giving me lots to research because as soon as I hear one story, I'm looking for a book or something.
Well, trying to get back into the 21st century, we've got a major problem on our streets. I mean, I sit here on Jefferson Street and I watch people aimlessly walk by, and I can see some
Mm,
of them aren't entirely connected to reality here
right.
with drugs that have just flooded this country. I mean, especially now we've got the fentanyl. I mean, I mean, as a younger generation people here, I think we could sort of live with marijuana and cocaine and the drugs we sort of grew up with. It's like it's not good, stay away from it, but
Mhm.
yeah, whatever. But the drug lords, they have to, or they can cut a corner. Hey, let's blend this with fentanyl, and now we kill like 100,000 Americans a year.
Yeah.
Do you agree with what Trump's doing with we're blowing up drug shipment boats and some of this, the more aggressive policing and maybe using drones down in Mexico and some of the things that are on the table and blocking a bunch of shipments at the border? What do we need to do about the drug problem? Because it's become more of a problem than it's been in previous decades of our lives.
Well, I served in harm reduction. So my insight is deal with it as if it were a supply and demand issue. And we've got to cut off the demand. We've got to offer treatment and help people to transition away from these substances. And that's the sustaining way to do it. And not criminalize them, truly offer them treatment. Now, this whole blowing up boats and things is very troubling. We have due process in this country, and that absolutely has to be respected. As someone who's been falsely arrested, I know how important that is. And as much as this administration lies to us, it's very concerning. I I can't guarantee that what they're telling us is correct with regard to these boats. But we have to protect what comes into our country. Absolutely. And we have the technology to do it. We should be using the technology.
Along those same lines, several months ago, I fell on the urinalysis with my psychiatrist. So he takes me off all my PTSD meds, um, and anxiety and all that stuff because I was using the Delta 8s, which is legal. And,
Mm,
even medical marijuana is legal in the state and nobody's got a license for it. We see the president
mm.
talking about reclassifying that. Do you think it's time that marijuana should be decriminalized and legalized in the United States?
Yes, so I lived in Michigan for a while. It can work. In fact, it can be a very important part of the economy. So in Michigan, end to end, they grow the product, sell it, distribute it, export it, and it's been incredibly incremental to their economy. And if anything, we should look at it in that way. But again, my concern is we rush through a lot of bills here in the state of Alabama. I want to make sure that it's rolled out in a way that folks who look like me don't become criminalized. Do we have the appropriate testing to ensure that, for example, someone stopped under suspicion? Can you do a rapid test? When Michigan rolled out recreational use of marijuana, their tests were giving false positives at traffic stops. So, what kind of problems could be created by allowing recreational use or decriminalizing? So, just want to make sure that we think about it end to end comprehensively.
Again,
Because I was, go ahead, Brandon.
at that southern border, we have kind of a problem with illegals entering the country. And, now there's probably 10 to 20 million illegal people illegally living here in the US. Um, President Trump has radically increased deportations and ICE actions. Is this the right strategy, or is there another way to handle this?
We're a nation of laws, and there are some significant security concerns of having folks in the country who we don't even know. So what I think is missing is the due process and the empathy. And again, the judicial branch is stepping in. We just saw in, I want to say, Chicago or Illinois, that arrest outside of courthouses where folks are just trying to go through the legal process for immigration, that is now banned. That is illegal. In fact, the ICE agents can be arrested for approaching individuals in those spaces. So I would like to see us maintain our borders in an empathetic way that doesn't terrorize immigrants who are so important to our culture and our economy.
Dakarai, we asked Senate candidate earlier this Randy Walker or Rodney Walker. Always get his name mixed up.
Rodney.
Yeah, I always call him Randy. Yeah, Rodney. The government's been shut down now for what, 16, 17 days. Republicans are blaming Democrats. Democrats are blaming Republicans.
Yeah.
Is it one or the other, or both of them to blame?
A government shutdown represents a failure of the legislative branch, full stop. And literally, we talked about the powers of each branch. It's the power of the purse. If you can't pass a budget, and this wasn't even a budget, this was just another continuing resolution, you're a failure. That is literally your job. And I would support legislation that says that they must pass a full budget, whatever that period is it annual or biannual? It has to be passed. It has to be passed on time. We could also make balanced budget, like some states, for example, a requirement. Probably not there yet with our debt, but it's a failure of the entire branch.
Dakarai, getting back into the political horse race, federal FEC reports came out, and I think Barry Moore was the top fundraiser, in the Senate deal. I mean, nobody is doing the numbers that we saw last time we had an open seat where, I mean, tens of millions of dollars were spent by Katie Britt and Durant and, Congressman Brooks. Are you concerned that if you get this Democrat nomination, and there's at least two more Democrats running for this, that the Republicans will kind of do the Katie Britt thing against Will Boyd and just throw 10 million against whatever you can raise? I know you've already raised more than Reverend Boyd, but we're not approaching Katie Britt numbers. Can the money drown out the message is my question here.
Well, first off, it's going to be a very messy Republican primary. So more and more people are still joining that race. So they're going to spend their money for sure in the primary. And then on the back end, I think the real opportunity is winning the Democratic primary without needing to do a runoff. And then that really gives a runway to raise money nationally. We know that that is required to win these types of elections. So that's the strategy. And we're polling well ahead of my competitors and also gaining national attention. And to be a year and a half out to
Well,
at
we're
this
just
point,
11 months out. Well, we're 13 months out.
we started this campaign a year and a half out. So between that a year and a half out to now, the media attention we've gotten for a race in Alabama as a Democrat for a first-time candidate is unheard of. So I can only imagine the attention we'll get next year, in the year, on the year. So we're going to look at that, how we use PR, earned media, to build a name recognition, and then really sell my experience. Um, Currently, we have a coach as our senior senator and an SGA president. So I have 20 years of public service experience.
Kind of along those same lines, you talked about earlier, groups reaching out to like urban and gays and turning up those numbers. How do you appeal to the major voting bloc in the United States? I mean, in the Alabama's probably the United States too. White male, blue collar voters without a high school education.
Well, this campaign is about talking to everyone. So I did mention those categories that are
Oh, I'm
probably
sorry, I might have missed that.
non-traditional. No, no. So I did mention some rather non-traditional categories that we want to dial up, but I've spent time with farmers, Quakers, um, Southern Christian Leadership Conference. We are going to talk to everyone, um, and reach out to them with the message of investing in Alabamians and not culture wars. We're not getting anywhere. We've seen the last 8 years in this state. Culture war issues are not getting us ahead. That's not investing in education or healthcare.
Gary, this week there was a arguments before the Supreme Court, on the Louisiana case, about congressional redistricting. Depending on what that ruling is, it will impact existing law, as it pertains to Alabama's own congressional redistricting, which is still being contested in the federal appellate courts. As a senator, are you for restoring, I guess, assuming Article 5, Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act goes the way, what was it, Section 2? I may be getting those reversed. Did, in Shelby versus Holder. I think Terry Sewell has that kind of legislation. Would you support that in the Senate, or do you think we need to move beyond, racial quotas in the redistricting?
Well, we're in this weird moment where it seems like each week we're supposed to move beyond any type of quote unquote DEI or any type of consideration for race. And how are we ready to do that if all of the statistics show one particular group is underperforming in health outcomes, in income, in assets? So these laws were written in an attempt to try to fix some of those issues with proper representation. So I think it is fully appropriate that be maintained and ensure that we have at least two representatives from Alabama in Black opportunity districts.
Do you think it's going to reach out even further than that, where we have to have Hispanic districts or even gay districts or Chinese districts?
Well, I think some folks have made that argument where does it end, right? Um, Again, we have to go back to the data. Which populations are struggling? And frankly, the country owes them an opportunity to catch up. So I would have a hard time finding another demographic that needs that assistance. And I believe Supreme Court Justice Brown likened it to a disability. When you look at the statistics, facing people of color, in particular Black folks, there is a need for assistance and proper representation.
Dakarai, we've kept you for very nearly an hour. We thank you so much for being here. Is
I
there
thank
anything you would
you.
like to say before we wrap this up?
I would like to say thank you so much for all the tough questions, and you've given me a lot to think about and to research. And, I do not purport to know it all. I am a learn it all, not a know it all. I thank you so much for this time. And I encourage your listeners to check me out at DakariLarriet.com and learn about our policies. And it's all about kitchen table. So education, healthcare, and economy, and how we get to work for Alabamians again. Thank you for the time today.
Thank you, Dakarai. I'll get this loaded up to YouTube later and you can share it to your,
All right.
thank you.
I so appreciate it. Y'all have a great
Thank you so
weekend.
much for being on.
You too.
Thank you. Bye-bye.